Now remember the time when oil prices were so high that the only challenge facing governments in the countries that exported was how to utilize the revenue. Well, that was then. Although the oil prices have recovered slightly in the last week, the dip due to the coronavirus crisis and a feud between Russia and Saudi Arabia is hurting. Here in Nigeria, executives in the oil industry admit the country is facing tough times ahead unless it escalates its diversity program. Well, Mr. Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, which is, of course, Nigeria's national oil company, joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Busy time for you then?
Very busy times.
What is the latest in terms of the oil markets? Where do things stand at the moment?
The oil markets did some slight recovery in the last 2 days after a very bad show last week, which saw oil prices collapsing below $15 for our benchmark crude of Brent. And that has recovered significantly as a result of changes to sentiment. In this market, two things play: the market fundamentals and sentiments. The sentiments came into play after the intervention of President Trump on the possible engagement between Russia and its partners and Saudi Arabia and the rest of us to get some balancing back into the market to cut, literally to cut supply. That worked, and obviously the response in the market is the recovery to $32 to the barrel this morning. Whether or not this is sustainable is another question that will depend on the outcome of the potential engagement that will happen tomorrow. In real sense, two things also happened. Prior to the COVID-19 situation, there was actual oversupply in the market, which wasn't related to the COVID-19. And then, of course, COVID-19 came, and the overall oversupply came to around 6.8 million barrels as at last week. This is quite significant, and this is also very visible because you have a lockdown in the United States of America, in most of Europe, in the whole of India for a month. And this potentially means that that oversupply will grow. And if this is not curtailed, of course, you will still see some gradual slide back into the sub-20s if the situation is not abated. In terms of real terms, I know that countries will come back. Everybody is doing something to come back to work, and therefore economies will pick up. And I see a situation where the oil market will balance as an year average of nothing below the 30s.
Right, that's being very optimistic. You expect the price of oil to pick up at some point. I mean, you've mentioned a number of indicators that are giving you that confidence, but that's obviously speculative at this stage, isn't it? Even though I suppose in furtherance of what you're saying, China appears to be getting back to normal, appears to be.
Yes, indeed. The market, as I said, has two fundamentals: demand and supply. And this is clearly visible to the whole world. So we can see when demand grows and we can see when it comes down. It can also manage supply. So they are all visible. So what I meant is that as soon as these countries come back to work, you will see a growth in the demand. You can put numbers around that. And of course, in terms of supply, suppliers have control over what comes to the market, and that is determined by the price and the cost of production, and so many things that come into play. Right. So these fundamentals are very, very visible. And the indications that we have today of the numbers is that these countries will come back to work, and those supply will pick up. You will no longer have the 6 to 7 million barrels of oversupply. To be something lower than that. As long as that number goes down, it comes to a balancing situation, the prices will go up.
Right. Now, you made a comment on Nigeria's oil production cost and what this portends for the country. You said that it costs on average about $30 to produce a barrel of crude oil. But we do know that oil firms operate in different sort of areas, and that this is a major determinant of their production cost. I mean, could you sort of break this down by telling us how much it costs to produce a barrel of oil onshore, in shallow waters, in the deep waters off Nigeria's coast?
Yes, thank you very much. When you say average of crude oil cost of production, what it means is that you looking at your entire basket portfolio of investments. And we do have production streams that deliver at $15 to $17 maximum. You also have assets that deliver at even above $35 to the barrel. And in very different environments. Typically the onshore production is cheaper than the offshore when it is operated optimally. And many of the assets that produce below $20 are actually onshore. And of course, knowing what the offshore means, the cost of production is high. It's also coming down. So on the continental shelf or production where there's some level of water, but it's not deep water, there you have a much lower cost than the onshore. The reason is very simple. There are few operators in that environment. There are fewer distractions, and also the nature of the reservoirs in such a way that you can deliver at a lower cost. So in a situation like this, you see a range of prices, cost of production ranging from $15 to $38. And where you are faced with a situation like this, you focus on the low cost production. You take away your money from where it's going to cost you more money to produce. Well, even that is dependent on your situation. When it's an entry situation, for instance, you are just starting production, obviously you are at the cost recovery phase, and your cost of production will obviously be high until you are able to completely amortize your initial entry cost. So even where cost of production for an asset can be as a start here, you will continue to produce because that is really a cost recovery phase, and after that you come back to normalcy.
Well, I mean, for those of us who are not experts in the oil industry, such as yourself, we've heard from other experts, and they've explained that the inefficiencies inherent in the upstream oil and gas sector emanate from the development cost, which is in the range of $20 to $25 a barrel, while actual drilling cost is as low, apparently, as $10 per barrel. Now, clearly this is a high development cost, and it's been blamed on the so-called gravy train in the production process linked to operators, National Petroleum Investment Management Services that you oversee in your capacity as the GMD. I mean, what are you doing to address this apparent waste in the system?
Yes, waste may not be the right word to describe
what's the right word
situation.
To describe it?
Is your operating environment is very different. For instance, we know that there are jurisdictions where you can produce oil at $3 to the barrel. It's a completely different environment. And two things also happen in those environments. One is the global environmental issues, which is the legislative framework, the nature of the government, the nature of the contracts that are in place. And secondly, you have the reservoir issues. Some reservoirs, they are just like pot. You put your well into it, you take out the oil. It's very different from our environment. Now here, we have two issues also here. We have the environment issues. Our cost of production here is clearly influenced by our environment. Cost of security, the losses that companies suffer as a result of the activities of vandals and thieves. Also the issues around premium that service providers do. Whenever you tell them they are coming to operate in Nigeria, they put a factor on it. Even ordinary personnel costs are different for people who come to this country. So when you pull all this together, you have a gamut of costs that are absent in many jurisdictions. And of course, our reservoir itself is of different make. It's not the same thing that you have in the calcareous reservoir that you have in Saudi Arabia, for instance. So it costs you more. The wells are deeper in some of our locations. And also the cost of putting the assets in place are such that it's a very different environment. It's not really necessarily as a result of any wastages. Yes, I can agree that there could be issues around governance, which we are trying to address. There could be issues around blotting the costs or not picking the right projects in time, delivering them on time, delays associated with non-settlement of cash call, and so many things, which cumulatively come up to increase your cost of production. Yes, I know that there are issues, but they are not the fundamental. The fundamental is the environmental issues, which we have very little control, and also the nature of our production environment itself.
So basically, cutting production costs is something that can't be achieved in the short term.
It can be achieved. You can do two things, is to plan early.
Right.
Planning early means that you need to be selective in where you put your money. Once you're able to tell where you're going to put your money, how you're going to put money becomes a secondary issue. And then you have to watch your contracting process. Your contracting process means even a delay in timing can cost you money.
Yeah, but you're saying you have to. Are you doing that?
Yes, we're doing that. There are many issues. First of all, we are determined to ensure increase in our local capacity to deploy some of the services the industry requires by law, and also by sheer persuasion that this is the right thing to do. But when you make such decisions, just as is done in any country and any jurisdiction, the moment you decide to do it, it has a premium.
Okay, I'm going to just ask you, we will continue this chat in a moment. Just hold it because I've got to take a break. And it's time for a break, as I said, more ahead, including we continue our discussion with Mr. Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director of Nigeria's national oil company, NNPC. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show, coming to you from Arise News in Abuja. It's a special show. I'm Charles Anyegolu, and with me in the studio, Mr. Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director of Nigeria's national oil company, NNPC. He is still with me in the studio. Thank you ever so much for your abiding patience, sir.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Now, Nigeria clearly has an immediate challenge of shoring up its oil revenues in the face of dwindling oil demand and low prices caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and other issues, obviously, the feud between Russia and Saudi Arabia. What options does the NNPC have at this time to get more of its crude cargoes sold in the international market? Because I understand there's an absolute glut, particularly in West Africa.
Thank you very much. This is not typical to Nigeria or NNPC. You have a situation where you have oversupply, demand is below supply. And essentially what this means is prices have come down to levels that in very many jurisdictions is below cost.
Yeah, but can you even sell the oil?
Yes, you can. There are two things you can do when situations like this come up, is to cut down your price. Which is what Saudi Arabia did initially, to cut down their prices by $10.2 to the barrel. And of course, the whole world followed that. Many countries did the same thing. We did the same thing. We discounted our crude from $3 to $4 so that we're able to have penetration into the market. That paid off to some extent, but it didn't completely address the issue. So what countries normally do is to shut in production. What companies do, not necessarily even countries. It's to shut in production because you have no need to produce them if you can't sell it. If you can't sell it,
well, absolutely.
Absolutely. So you have no need for doing this. But sometimes you're also forced to produce it even when you can't sell it, so that you look for a person, anyone who's going to take it up, as is happening in the Canadian heavy oil. The cost of bringing down these wells, for instance, in Canada, is cheaper for you to pay somebody to pick it. And they did that 2 weeks ago to give people a check of $1 so they can come and take the oil. Literally, take it free. I'm also going to reward you. So it can be an extreme situation where companies can resort to that. But in our case, we have no such need because our reservoirs are not this way. We can clearly, very efficiently shut down our wells and bring them back into production. So if it gets to that extreme of not having the market, you can actually decide to cut down the production.
But it hasn't got to that point.
We haven't gotten to that. We won't get to that. Right. What we're also doing is to look at the assets themselves, like we have spoken earlier. Some assets produce at lower cost than the others, and typically that's what every company does is to say, look, let me not produce from the high-cost facilities, let me produce from the low-cost facility until we move in. But it's also an opportunity for us, because if you are able to expand your capacities within this period to produce more, even if it at low prices, even if it is below cost, ultimately it places you in a position in the market where tomorrow people will rely on you. You are a reliable supplier of petroleum that the whole world requires in times to come, and therefore you are taking a position in the future by losing today. But you will also not completely lose, because there are many things you can do today to make sure that the revenue stream supports what you are doing, which is by cutting down your costs, slowing down your projects, so that the projects that you can push forward, you can push them forward, cut down certain services that you are taking that you probably don't need today, and ultimately you balance your book such a way that at the list of resources that is available to you, you are still able to operate, and you're also still able to meet the requirements of your shareholders. Your shareholder, in this case, for us as a national oil company, the whole of Nigerians, they will expect that this company delivers value to them at the end of every month. We see also beyond that, which is that the tax revenues that is coming from petroleum, the royalties that come from petroleum, they're all tied to oil and gas production, including the VAT and imports. I'm sure you are aware of all this. So what you do in a situation like this is to reduce your costs, move your priorities to the assets that produce, and of course, the ultimate that everybody does, which is to borrow. You borrow so that you can fill this gap of today, believing and consciously thinking that tomorrow will come, that tomorrow will bring higher oil prices that will cover for the cost of the borrowing that you have done today and the cost of the losses that you will suffer today, while still keeping your shareholders whole during this period.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the problem is the fact that the oil market, beyond the fact that it's very volatile at the moment, is also the fact that oil as an energy source is under threat, isn't it? I mean, the International Energy Agency estimates that by 2040, fossil fuels such as oil will, constitute less than 50% of global energy demand. But for oil producing countries like Nigeria, I mean, it'll take decades to replace the oil and gas infrastructure that are locked into the economy and to wean this country away from dependence on oil, won't it? Are you thinking ahead in that sense?
Yes, very well we do. We watch the markets, we watch the demand and supply balances into the future, and looking at our resources that are available to us, huge resources of gas and oil. So we have a stake in this industry to make sure that we look beyond today. I don't want to dispute what EIA said, but I know also that there are several other assessments by very many organizations and institutions, which clearly, if you look at the average of the views of all of them, you will see that even by 2050, fossil fuel will continue to be the source of energy. In the energy mix, it will constitute about 70% of the energy mix. It means that petroleum will be relevant in 2050.
Right.
And who will stay there will be the companies or countries that are able to deliver it efficiently and in the best cost-effective manner. So it will continue to play. And for us as a developing country, 20 years to come, 30 years to come, by 2050, we'll still be in a position to make to utilize oil. So the production that we are doing today, our target of 3 million barrels per day, if our economy continues in this projectile of this growth that we are seeing, in the coming years, that I know that this country will probably consume all the production that it can make here. And it's cheap resource. Yes, people are moving to renewables. Yes, it's a bit of exotic stuff. But the reality today is that fossil fuel is the advantage that we have today, particularly gas resources, and that as we grow, even as the world moves away from complete fuel, petroleum fuel, we know that this country will have utility for this. We are still not yet in the times of having the renewables as the major source of supply, as we all know. Today, the electrically driven vehicles, and they can't come here because we are yet to stabilize our electricity supply. And many things, and they're not within the immediate view of...
yeah, but it reduces your market, doesn't it? Because Europe, I mean, the UK, all these countries are moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy.
It rather changes...
And those are the people who buy your
It rather
your
changes
product.
your market. Your market become yourself. That is the point I'm making. You can't be the market.
Okay, well, that's an interesting thought, and I don't want to belabor it because we're not there yet. Let's return to the present. There's an OPEC meeting coming up tomorrow, or that is supposed to come up tomorrow. Russia, other oil producers, they were supposed to have met previously to try and end the turmoil in the energy markets. That was called off a few days ago. Is there any certainty about the negotiations between sort of Russia and Saudi Arabia? These are the two world's largest producers. They've continued to sell their oil at huge discounts to gain market share.
There are a lot of overreaction in the market, which includes a discount of prices and also unilateral cut down of production. But what I also know today is that my last conversation with the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum, Timothy Silva, is to the effect that the meeting of the video conference of tomorrow will hold. And that is aimed at making sure that partners and parties come on the table to see some form of balancing introduced in the market, literally to cut down production, so that the supply and demand balance is brought to reality. Whether or not that will happen tomorrow is anyone's guess, but from the market reaction and the sentiments that you have seen during this week, it appears obvious that some form of understanding will be attained. But I'm not in position to make definitive statement on this.
You can't predict.
I can't predict, and also the Honorable Minister of State will be in the best position to make a comment on this.
But would you say that Nigeria's economy and revenue stream is tied to the outcome of that meeting?
Not at all. Actually, we are rebalancing our expectations to crude oil price as if we are going to have even out at 30 during the year. So whether or not this meeting takes place means that this country will have its recourse to its adjustments, which includes borrowing, includes cutting our costs such that we survive out of this situation, and we also don't stifle the growth part that we have seen. So I'm not sure it is connected in any way to what will be the outcome of tomorrow's meeting. It will be a good thing if the meeting comes up with some form of intervention and cut that will enable the rebound of the crude oil prices to a budget level of 57. Even if that doesn't happen, and we're not expecting that there will be full recourse to that balancing by tomorrow's meeting, because the build-up of the stock took a time, and then recovery of the demand will also take time. So it's not something that you will see the immediate effect today. Even that taken into consideration, we know that this country will survive this process through cutting of costs and changing our strategies about what would we do with the petroleum.
Right. Let's take a look at the domestic scene. Obviously, you correctly pointed out that you have to kind of plan ahead, think, strategize. You've got a glut in oil at the moment. There's no question about that. Aliko Dangote, a refinery coming up. Will the NNPC be making overtures to that operation because of the present glut in oil?
It's not overture. The Dangote refinery, we are very interested in the Dangote refinery for very strategic nationalism. Because whenever you have a situation where you become a net importer of petroleum, you're in trouble. Anything can happen along the value chain as long as you are far away from the source of supply. So the coming on the table of the Dangote refinery and very many other refinery initiatives will first of all guarantee that this country returns to a net exporter of petroleum in the short term. What that will do is to guarantee security of supply,
right,
and so that we don't rely on external resources and sources to get our energy needs satisfied. So we see the Dangote refinery as an opportunity, and there are many other opportunities. We are doing something about what we call a condensate refinery. What that means is that the condensate resources we have, which are very easy to convert to fuel, not like a typical refinery, but it does work very quickly. You can put it on the deck, and then we can also convert up to 90% of the feedstock into, for instance, the light end petroleum product. We have gotten commitments by one of our partners to take FID in June or July, so that we know that we're doing that because it's almost like an off-the-shelf kind of arrangement. There's something that can get it to work in 2 years. So we have 4 other initiatives of that nature, combined capacity of probably getting 200,000 barrels of condensate. And the combination of that, the Dangote 650,000 barrels per day, and our refineries that we are fixing. Once you have that combo of opportunities, you will see Nigeria becoming a net exporter of gasoline to the West African countries, the whole of West Africa within our view, and probably reverse the flow of products because it comes from Europe, not because Europe is the source of petroleum, but because the processing facilities are there. And once you see this market dynamics, the only thing that is going to reverse is freight. And you can see flow of petroleum product coming from Nigeria, even into Europe. That's possible within the short term.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you to stay with us again because we would like to talk to you some more fascinating discussion, giving us all an insight into, some would say, the murky world of oil. It looks murky in any case. Stay with us. It's time for a break, more ahead as we continue our discussion with Mr. Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director of NNPC, Nigeria's national oil company. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show, a special edition coming to you from Arise News in Abuja. I'm Charles Anyegolu, and with me in the studio, Mr. Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director of Nigeria's national oil company, NNPC. He is here in Abuja. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And I know you're wondering when this is going to come to an end. And I will say that it'll come to an end soon enough, once we've got enough answers from you. But we appreciate your patience, and obviously we're not keeping you here. But we're trying to get as much as we can. It's a rare opportunity to talk to someone like yourself. Let's talk about Nigeria's refineries. We're talking a little bit about that before we went on break. Production capacity of this country's refineries in the last 2 decades. There've been a lot of money put into them, and a lot of money invested in those refineries. They're still not producing. What is the current state of affairs?
First of all, we made a very conscious decision to shut them down. We are better off shutting them down to know exactly what you want to do with it. I recognize that there are several attempts by very many management and governments in the last 20, 25 years to make sure that these refineries work. But that's something that is fundamentally wrong.
Right.
Which is, did you really know what you wanted to do with the refineries? And what kind of repairs do you really want to do? What kind of rehab? Is it turnaround? Any name that you call it. But without properly scoping what you need to do, which was never done. You know, in all the attempts at turnaround maintenance, actually putting the cart before the horse. You know, decisions are made, go ahead and do a turnaround maintenance, call a contractor, and all kinds of aberrations that are not normal in a refinery rehab process come into play. And ultimately, the end result is that as we speak today, these refineries are not working because we never got it right. And the decision we made is conscious. We said, let's just get somebody to tell us what exactly do we need to do. You don't just go call some people and come and say, let's do turnaround maintenance. As you uncouple the plans, you decide what to do. We said, let's just know what is wrong and what we need to do. And in respect to Port Harcourt Refinery today, we know exactly what is wrong, which was never done. And on the basis of that, we have also secured financing for getting it done. And on top of that also, we're going to have an O&M contract. NNPC won't run it. We're going to get somebody who will give us a guarantee that this plant will run for a period of time on the basis of a fee that run this for us. Let's try a different model of getting these refineries run. We're going to apply the same process to the other 2 refineries so that at the end of the day, once we are done with the fixing of this on the basis of a full scoping, getting a private partnership to put their money into it, and ultimately we will allow the shareholders to decide what they want to do with it. Our prescription will be that make it the LNG kind of structure, an LNG kind of structure, where there's clear ownership of the private sector in this refinery, where decision-making does not rest with the NNPC, and where any process that is world-class is allowed to come into play. As we speak today, we know that a number of obstructions in processes when it is maintained the way that we're doing today. So we know that this is what is different. Many GMDs have spoken about getting these refineries fixed. I agree completely that Nigerians have a right to be disappointed, to be apprehensive, to be doubtful of what we are going to do. But what we will do, which is different, is that we'll fully scope for it. We will not operate this plant, and we'll recommend that at the end of the day, the model like what you have in the NLNG comes into play, such a way that there's an assurance that these plants will run, because we have seen it work, but in our plant that we sold to Indorama in LMA, and also the way and the manner in which the NLNG has worked over the years without any major disruptions and delivering value to the shareholders. I think this is what is different. This is the assurance that I can give Nigerians that it's not just another promise. A promise is such that we won't do it ourselves.
Okay, we'll hold you to that. Let's stay in the domestic scene. You recently said that the subsidy regime for petrol was over, and there will be no under-recoveries declared by NNPC as the sole importer of petrol. Yet Nigerians, as I'm sure you're aware, remain skeptical about your comments, saying that you have been able to sell petrol at a reduced price at fuel outlets because the price of crude oil has crashed, but when it goes up, that'll be the real test as to whether NNPC and other marketers will be allowed to adjust their pump prices upwards in sync with the price of crude oil. Is there any truth to that assertion?
Absolutely. First, let me explain what we mean by under recovery. NNPC in the last 2 years plus is the sole importer of PMS, because marketers are unable to go to the market, procure petroleum, and sell it at the pump at 145 because it is impossible to do this. You can't do this and recover your costs and make a margin out of it. So they left us to manage this. Of course, we have no issue with that because it's our role. By law, NNPC is supposed to guarantee the security of energy for this country. So we can't avoid that. So we step in to cover that situation. What it also means is that because we are managing the assets of the Federation on behalf of all of us, we are required also by law is to deduct all our costs and then deliver the net of that value to the Federation account. This is also provided by law. So our cost of production, cost of supply, which we have no way of putting it on our balance sheet, it has to be on the balance sheet of the Federation. We are delivering products, selling it at sub-market condition. There is a delta between the two, and that delta we consider it as an under recovery of cost, and then we charge it to the cost of our operations and then deliver the balance to the Federation account. You can give it any name. People call it subsidy. It is subsidy when you are dealing with private oil marketing companies because they have no such instrument to deduct from cost of any revenue that they have. So once you have a subsidy regime, it means that government must write a check to give you to those who involved in many forms. It can be tax rebates, it can be cash-based settlements, and all the problems that it has created for all of us in the past. I don't need to elaborate on that. We know what this means. It also introduces one other element, which is that it creates an arbitrage. That arbitrage is what is responsible for NNPC or Nigeria now becoming the sole supplier of petroleum for most of the West African countries. They will have no need to import because they can get cheap fuel here. They will have no recourse to FX procurement, which is also a safeguard that we have done to them. And ultimately, you are seeing supply levels and the excess of 60 million liters every day. Anytime we attempt to bring the supply level below that level, you will see queues in our street. So we are conscious of this reality that this is not our consumption. We know this is not our consumption, but we cannot supply below that level because we are also supplying the whole of West Africa. And as a matter of fact, and many people may not know, that you can find Nigeria petroleum even as far as in Sudan, Central Africa, and many other countries around us. So we have just become a market for all. And we are literally subsidizing West Africa. And coming back home also, the whole idea of paying sub-market cost for petroleum is such that we are actually subsidizing the elites. Me and you, Charles.
Well, I'm not part of the elite.
You are, Charles.
I'd say that you are, but I'm certainly not.
So don't exclude yourself, but assuming you are not, So what we are doing is that we are taking from everybody else, the poor masses of this country, which Mr. President is very passionate about. We are taking from them to feed the needs of the elites. They are the ones who have the SUVs, they are the ones who have the 5 cars, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, the end result is that we are unable to deliver on infrastructure, on hospitals, education, and so on, in the name of providing support for fuel prices. What we have done very recently is not just for today, not because the market has shifted so that we can sell at below the 145. No. Right. What has happened is that we are going to go into a modulated environment, which means that as the fuel prices move, the market forces will determine the price, will adjust the prices within a band that marketers can play without exploiting the ordinary people, while returning the value, the under recovery, or any name you call it, all the distortions that exist in the system, we return that value back to the ordinary people, which Mr. President is very passionate about. I know this is tough, but this is the wisest thing that we can do today, not because the market prices have gone down, but because we can't continue to afford this. We cannot continue to subsidize these elites that are there all over the years, even when it comes to the fraud and everything that goes wrong with petroleum distribution and supply comes back to the elites. And the brunt of it is taken by the ordinary people. This will save the ordinary people. It will make their leadership at every level accountable. It will also enable, particularly Mr. President, deliver on his objective to make sure that infrastructure projects are delivered, roads, hospitals, educational institutions are all put on the table, and bring that distortion out of our entire economic framework. There's a clear distortion. Whenever you are subsidizing consumption, you are creating a problem. Yes, I agree that in many jurisdictions, there's some form of support by government for certain production system. That is true even for agriculture. But that's where I should go, and not into consumptions that is like cigarette smoking.
Right, okay. We're almost out of time, and I know you want to leave, so we really appreciate your being here. But Let's talk briefly about the local gas markets and their impact on power and electricity. I mean, that's another area that touches every single Nigerian, whether you're elite or not elite. What is happening there?
Yes, two things. We are focused on delivering power to the market. And the way to do this is to improve on your gas supply. We're working across our assets, across our partners to make sure that we shift that balance of providing gas into domestic market from where we are today to at least 8 billion BCF of gas per day within the shortest frame of time. There are issues around that value chain. Today, some of the power plants can't take as much gas as we're able to deliver to them because there are grid restrictions that when they produce the power, they cannot evacuate that power. And the result of that is that they cut down on the gas uptake. We are happy of the Siemens intervention that is going on. That process of making sure that the grid is freed, the discos are able to take power and distribute it to consumers. Once that is done, you will see gradual and very significant increase in supply of gas into the domestic market. As we speak today, some of the gas plants are curtailed by either ability to take the gas or ability to discharge the production of the power that they have done into the market. So there are conversations going on, engagement with all the stakeholders in the value chain, from the producers of gas to producers of power, the transmission company into the distribution company, so that within a short frame of time, with all the arrangements that are on ground, I see a situation where there will be a huge improvement in delivery of gas into power.
Okay. Mr. Mele Kyari, Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, which is the Nigerian national oil company. I want to thank you very much indeed for your patience and your time. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much, Chance. I deeply appreciate you also.